Hi there. This webinar is titled, Are You an Asset or a Burden? And it's all about improving your ability to influence people around you without the luxury of formal authority. This is especially relevant to people who are working within large international corporations who have evolved over the years into a more matrix-like structure and management system in which, in order to get things done, you have to collaborate with people who are not necessarily part of your organization within that enterprise. Now, the purpose of this model is to help you enhance your influence and in some cases grow your business using the specific methodology that applies to relationship management within the organization. The assumption behind this model is that just like any other project, relationships too can and should be managed in a way that's quantifiably evaluated. So you should be able to build relationship roadmaps. You should be able to evaluate where you stand with people using objectively measurable KPIs, and I will be showing you examples of such relationship KPIs later in the webinar. Now, in order to really jump in, I want to give you just a few short sentences about the idea of persuasion in general in context of what we've mapped to be 10 core variables of persuasion. I'm not going to go into every one of them. This is a separate webinar. But just to put you in perspective, this webinar is about the messenger status. The messenger status has to do with how people perceive you. People ultimately think about you and have a gut response to you. And that response can be either positive or negative, and it will have a very, very strong influence on the overall willingness they have to work with you. When they get an email from you, will they want to respond immediately or will they want to delay it? When they see that they have a meeting with you, are they generally happy about it or is it another negative event in their day? And so it really is very much about the combination of the actual value you generate to people, but even more than that, it's about the experiential memory they have of you. And so when we look at messenger status, it's important to understand it's not who you actually are. It's not about your resume, it's not about your bio, it has nothing to do with your formal credentials. It does, on the other hand, have everything to do with how they perceive you. And while this perception can be completely subjective and even completely detached from reality, that is the perception that will affect how people engage with you. Will they want to collaborate with you? Will they trust you? Will they empathize with you? Will they have goodwill towards you? And so messenger status is definitely at the very foundation of this webinar because we are dealing with the idea of improving our influence through the process of establishing relationships with people within the organization. So it really comes down to this. Somebody thinks about you. And it doesn't even have to be directly. This can be as random as somebody walking down the street and seeing somebody that reminds them of you, and boom, immediately they position you on a scale, on an emotional, experiential scale, which on the left hand is negative and puts you as a burden to them, in which case, of course, they will avoid you because you will be outside of their comfort zone, or they could see you as an asset, in which case you will be their comfort zone and they will gravitate to you. And the purpose of this webinar is to show you how you can consistently and steadily move to the right of this axis. Now, if we were to look at the right part of the axis, we would then say that as you move along that axis, you can accumulate different statuses in the mindset of the other person. You can be a provider to them. You can then progress to being a trusted advisor. You can then progress to be a partner or a business partner. Now, these are not formal titles. These titles represent a certain predisposition that they will have to you. When you are a provider, yes, you're on the part of the axis that's positive. You are an asset, but they'll just come to you when they need you. They will come to you specifically to provide certain services, and your relationship will be very limited. But as you move to the right of that axis, you will see that your overall influence over these people improves. Now, the reason I put a dotted line here that is then followed by an arrow that suddenly moves from linear growth to exponential growth is because the process of moving from provider to trusted advisor to business partner is something you do through a one-on-one relationship dynamic. It is only when you achieve partnership status with a group of people that you ultimately become an opinion leader to all of them, in which case your influence grows dramatically. Now, I want you to look at the bottom right part of the screen where it says your mindset slash, your status slash mindset. On the one hand, we are looking to improve your status, that is, how other people perceive you. But what's amazing about relationships and about how people perceive us is that we can actually affect that directly. If we adopt the mindset, if I walk into a room saying, I am going to behave and think like a trusted advisor to the person sitting across the table from me, you have automatically improved the chances of them seeing you as one dramatically. Now, why is it so valuable? Why does the influence grow as you move to the right of this axis? Well, it has everything to do with the nature of decision-making processes. You see, in a rational decision-making process, or if somebody is moving along a rational decision-making path, they are ultimately going through 4 key milestones. And I should say I've simplified the model, but at the end of the day, these are the 4 key milestones. They should start by identifying or setting quantifiably measurable time-based objectives, meaning where do they want to get to? What are they dedicating their resources towards achieving? Once we have that, which I like to call a Northern Star, then they start looking at, okay, that's the what, now let's look at the how. How many different ways can I get there? And if you really want to apply rational decision making, then you actually have to try to map out all of the possible alternatives. Now, because there's no way of knowing if you found all of them, this is where we apply creative problem solving, and we just try to find as many as we can. Once we have multiple possible courses of action, then we start looking and comparing them to one another, comparing likelihood of that path actually working versus the cost of that path, and ultimately we want to find the most efficient and effective path forward. And that prioritization process is then the third process in decision making. Once I've done that, I select the path that's best for me, and I move to the 4th stage, which is executing. Now, how does this link to your status? In the following way. You see, if you're a provider, you are at the end of the other person's decision-making process. They've gone through everything, and you are now joining them as part of the execution phase. Again, this is valuable. You are an asset to them, but you are very much at the bottom of the chain. Jumping up to becoming a trusted advisor means that they will invite you in earlier in the decision-making process and allow you to participate in the selection process among the various alternatives that they've mapped. You might at times even be allowed to participate in the brainstorming session itself. If you are a partner, well, you are already closer than just mapping the alternatives. You even come before that. You are very much part of setting the objectives. And of course, if you're an opinion leader, then you are somebody who is actually influencing where people even want to go. Now, there is a reason why the distance on this slide between provider and trusted advisor is double the distance between trusted advisor and partner and then later leader. And the reason being is it's very, very hard to give up the mindset of providing, because when we provide, we have our own vested interest, right? I am a provider of consulting services. When a client calls me and says, Ariel, I'd like to bring you in to help us prepare a company retreat, or I'd like you to come in and do some training, my natural inclination would be to say, sure, of course, let me know when you need me to come in. And if they say, but do you feel that you can actually do the right thing for us? If I were just a provider, I'd say absolutely, because a provider wants to provide. And a provider looks more at the value he or she generates in the process of providing than at the actual value of the person receiving that value. Obviously, you're looking for win-win, but as a provider, I'm still taking care. I'm sitting across the table from my client. However, if I want to adopt the mindset of a trusted advisor and actually progress along this axis, when a client comes to me and says, I need you to do this and this for me, I will not immediately respond and say, sure, absolutely, no problem, I can do this, but rather start asking them questions such as, tell me, what is the desired outcome of this activity? What would you consider a successful outcome? And then together, let's see what the best way of getting there is. That way may not include me. And this is where there is an inherent tension between my interests, which are usually more tactical and more short-term as a provider, versus my interests as a trusted advisor, as somebody who sees you as a relationship that is lasting and that will generate more than one cycle of value to me, in which case I'm investing in building trust with you, and rather than sitting across the table from you, I actually get up and sit right by you, and together we start looking at the various alternatives you have available. And that's a difficult thing to do. It requires judgment. I'm not saying you should always operate as a trusted advisor, but I want you to understand there is a sacrifice involved. Now, I told you earlier that I would be showing you the idea of relationship key performance indicators because I said that a relationship should be managed like a project and should be measurable. And so the idea here is that if we have the right key performance indicators, we can actually measure a relationship. For instance, I would ask, is there a way for you to measure how much your wife or your husband loves you? Now, some would say, absolutely not. Emotions can't be measured. Not everything is an exact science. And I would argue that there's a lot of truth to that. However, all I have to do is start selecting certain behaviors between you and your spouse and say, when it's your turn to walk the dogs and it's raining outside, if your spouse says, oh dear, stay in bed, I'll do it for you, it must mean they love you more. Or the amount of times they tell you they love you. Or the amount of times that they bring you flowers. And so on and so forth. Now, you can argue with me that these are not the right KPIs for measuring love, and you know something? You may be right. And that's why, before I even go into introducing these 6 recommended KPIs, let me say this. It doesn't matter to me initially which relationship KPIs you decide to adopt, so long as you adopt relationship KPIs. Why? Because the minute you adopt the understanding that you should be tracking the relationship and using objectively measurable indications in order to discover if the relationship is improving or not, the minute you've taken that leap, it's less important to me initially which KPIs you use, because that's automatically going to instill in you a more proactive approach to relationship management. And if you walk away from this webinar saying, I now am going to monitor my relationship with certain individuals that I work with, this webinar will have done a good job. Now, you then test and see. Let's say that you've selected a KPI and it's improving, but the relationship isn't. That's a good indication that you're not using the right KPI. Choose another. Relationship management is not an instant thing. It's a lasting, ongoing process, and you should allow yourself the opportunity to conduct trial and error. These 6 relationship KPIs that I'm sharing with you have been KPIs that we've been using for years in various training formats for many different companies, and we've seen that they seem to work, so I offer them to you as a recommendation. Let's take a look at them one by one. The first one on the left says push versus pull. This looks at the basic dynamic of who is reaching out to whom more. For instance, out of every 10 emails that go between the two of you, how many of them were originally initiated by you? Are they turning to you and asking you for meetings, or do you have to chase them down? When you do ask for a meeting, how quickly will you get it? If they have to cancel it, will they take the initiative to reschedule, or will you have to follow up? And when they do reschedule, will it be for another 4 weeks, or will it be later in the week? Is your correspondence by email or also by phone? Do you actually meet face to face? when you meet face to face? Is it one-on-one or is it always with another group of people? So this is the idea of push versus pull. The second KPI has to do with timing, and in a way, I've addressed it. But this KPI basically says, when do you learn about things? When will you know when they need you? Will they come to you last minute and say, I need you to do this tomorrow, quickly, this is urgent? Is everything urgent? Is everything around the phase of execution? Are you the last person to know when they decide to change strategies or when they decide upon a strategy? Or do they actually tell you well in advance? The third KPI is called functionality. This KPI breaks down into two types. There's the functionality that looks at the compatibility between their expectations of you and your actual role definition. Do they turn to you with things that actually do fall within your role definition or not? The second part of functionality asks about the importance of the things they ask you to do to them. How critical are the tasks they give you? Do they trust you with mission critical tasks? Or do they just ask you to do the daily, mundane, trivial tasks? The fourth KPI is acknowledgement. This talks about any form of behavior that demonstrates the value that they acknowledge that you're giving them. This could be in many different types of forms. For instance, a meeting is being set up and they will circulate an email that says, please make sure that Jane, you, can actually attend this meeting, and if Jane can't, please reschedule. Or you're already in the meeting, they might turn to you in front of everybody and say, Jane, do you have anything to add? Or at the end of a project, they might circulate an email saying, and thank you so much for your help. It's not an ego thing. It's just an idea of looking for different behaviors. Some of them will be indirect and in passing, but behaviors that clearly indicate that they acknowledge and appreciate the value that you bring to the table. The fifth KPI is called access. The BI stands for business intelligence. And again, it also breaks up into two aspects of what you know about the other person. The first aspect is how much information do they voluntarily share with you? And what type of information do they share with you? And the second dimension is what kind of information are you able to gather on your own? But ultimately, access talks about everything you know about the other person. It can be professionally oriented, but it can also be a personal orientation. Do you know what their previous role was? Do you know what they aspire to for their next promotion? Do you know which projects they're working on that they're most concerned about? Do you know who their providers and trusted advisors and business partners are? Do you know who they look up to? Are they married? What are their children's names? What are their hobbies? What sources do they read? And so on and so forth. This is a very, very important and a very telling relationship KPI. And lastly, there's the KPI called personal, which I also like to call non-functional interaction. And this talks about how many times do you actually have interactions with a specific person that do not revolve around an immediate operational task or requirement. This could be lunch. This could be them poking their head through your door as they walk down the hall saying, hey, how are you? This could be them shooting an email to you saying, look at these pictures that I found online for my vacation. It could be anything. But the idea is, and this is very important, in our personal lives, we interact with people in a non-functional way all the time. And in a lot of times when we do an exercise with companies around this KPI, we like to joke around and tell people, think about a friend of yours that you haven't been in touch with for 2 years, and shoot them an email or write them on Facebook and say, hey Jake, it's been 2 years, sorry for not writing you earlier, I need your car for the weekend, do you mind if I borrow it? And of course, people start laughing and they think it's a joke, and I say, why wouldn't you write them? And they're like, well, I'm not going to write somebody after 2 years of not being in touch with them and just call them when I need them. Right? This is something that comes very naturally to all of us. It seems almost obvious. But when you look at how people interact in the working environment, it's ridiculous. They only turn to each other when they need something. And so the basic foundation for human interaction and relationship building and community building that is so obvious to us in our personal lives is completely lost on us in our professional environment. And this is a big problem. And that's why this KPI is so important. Let's move on. Now that we understand um, how we can monitor our progress both through milestones on the path to the right side of the axis, all the way to the opinion leader status. And now that we understand that we can actually measure that progress and proactively move along that graph using 6 relationship KPIs, it's time to start implementing it. And it begins by selecting the person you want to improve the relationship with. And that person should constitute a key stakeholder. So a key stakeholder is not automatically the most senior person you work with. It's not necessarily the boss. It's not necessarily the VP or the CEO or the president of the company. It is anybody in your operational landscape that you have a meaningful interaction with, meaning a lot of the work that you do goes through them. You are in many respects dependent on their collaboration. That can be one side of it. The other side of it could be that it's anybody that, by virtue of having a very good status with them, a very good relationship with, automatically spills over and has a positive impact on your relationship with others. This is not necessarily a political thing. This could have to do with the fact that by virtue of them collaborating with you, you are simply able to respond faster and more efficiently and more effectively to other people you work with who are later or further down the operational track that you're working on. Once you've selected a key stakeholder, what you want to do is you want to first create a relationship snapshot. You want to understand what is the current situation. So what you see here is a basic table that has on the left side the 6 KPIs I've given you, I've displayed to you, and then on the right side the current state. And this is usually really good to do on Excel, not on PowerPoint. But what you want to do is you really want to take a snapshot and say, okay, what's the current situation? For instance, on push versus pull, X number of interactions I have are initiated by me. It's always me asking for meetings, and so on and so forth. The more quantifiable you can be in determining the current state, the easier it will be for you to track and monitor your progress. So just like there's an example here for the push versus pull, here's another example for functionality, here's another example for timing, here's just one example of acknowledgement, there could be many. Here are 2 out of dozens of examples that you should have with the idea of access, and here are just another 2 examples of what non-functional interaction relates to. Once you've mapped out the current state, and again, take your time, come up with 50, 60, 70 items that you can put in this table, really create a comprehensive snapshot. Once you've done that, it's now time to move from the current state to the desired state. What would you now like to have happen? Now, it's very, very good to do this in a way where you're managing expectations not only as far as what you want to achieve, but in what time frame. Let's say within 3 months, within 6 months, within a year. Once you've determined a time frame that can help you manage expectations with yourself in a more accurate way, in a more reasonable way, start filling it in. So if before I wrote that 80% of our interactions were initiated by me, now I'd like to make sure that at least half of the interactions are actually initiated by her. I'd like to be in a situation where she turns to me and says, hey, I'd love you to be part of these meetings. And the same thing goes for functionality, for timing, acknowledgement, access, and again, non-functional. Now, I've just given you a few examples because I didn't want to create a crowded slide, but when I say we have lunch whenever she's in town, I can say also I'd like to have lunch at least 4 times a year. I want it to be quantifiable because when it's quantifiable, it's more manageable, and the more clearly defined your targets are, the more proactive you will find yourself being. And that's very, very important. Okay. Now that I understand where I am and I understand where I want to be, it's time to get their input. Now we turn to the key stakeholder that we've selected and we ask them for a meeting. And usually that meeting, you can ask for it in a very simple way, something along the lines of, hey, Mr. So-and-so, I've been building my strategic plan for the next 3 to 6 months, and I decided that before I would finish building it, I would meet with you because I really want to understand what your expectations are of me so I can make sure to incorporate them into whatever operational plan my team and I are putting together. And I can tell you that in the past, when I've done this with different groups, initially I did not tell people to limit this exercise to 2 or 3 key stakeholders. And because people were so jaded and so cynical and so pessimistic, what they did was they sent this kind of an email to like 7 or 8 people. And then they were shocked when all of them responded in a favorable way and were even willing to meet with them within 2 weeks. This, of course, created a big problem because they couldn't handle so much. So don't be pessimistic. When you turn to people with a framing that's asset oriented, that's positive, that's all about them and not you. It's not about what you're trying to get out of them. It's what you're trying to do for them. You will find that even the busiest managers are very receptive. Now, when you meet with them, it is very, very important that you dedicate that meeting to listening. And so you want to ask them a question such as, if I could do anything for you, what would you need? How do you feel that I can help you? And then when they answer you, do not approve and do not negate what they say. Simply write it down under the expectations column. Now, because we live, especially in large international corporations, under a dramatic paradigm of starvation for resources. And this is unbelievable, because humanity has never controlled more resources than it has ever in the past. And companies today are as rich as companies have ever really been. And yet people are rocking around like a chicken without a head, constantly starving for resources. This is partly due to the fact that companies are constantly cutting costs. It has to do with the fact that the market is very competitive, so companies are constantly trying to embrace what would appear as unrealistic targets. There's a lot of internal competition for resources within the enterprise. So yes, I get why everybody's running around feeling like they're starving for resources. As a result of that, when you ask people, what can I do for you, or what do you need, this is the famous genie in a bottle question of, if you had one wish, what would you wish for? In many, many cases, people's responses are not goal-oriented or result-oriented, but rather resource-oriented. They ask for money. And so when that happens, you have to stay very attuned. And if somebody tells you that when they need something from you that sounds to you like a resource, ask them a simple question. If I did this for you, how would this benefit you? And automatically that goes into the value slide. We want to be value-centric. If you want to be somebody's asset, and if you want to leave yourself with as wide a range of possibilities for helping them generate the actual end result, the value they're looking for, you have to stay aware of when the answer they give you is a how answer and not a what answer. How answers are resource-oriented. What answers are value-oriented. They tend to be result-oriented. Now, again, when you're done, you can ask them questions like, is there anything else? Is there a certain priority that you want me to consider? And it's very important that when they speak to you, you write it down. This is called active listening. And when you ask them questions such as, which of these points would you say is more important? Which one would you like me to spend more time making sure I can do for you? These questions send a very important covert message to that person, which basically communicates to them your true commitment, your sincere desire to generate value for them. And then the meeting ends. Don't say to them, oh yeah, sure, I can do this for you. Or don't say, I'm sorry, but this is beyond my abilities or beyond my job. Simply take your notes and say to them something along the lines of, thank you for this meeting. Please allow me a week or two to digest and review and see exactly of all these things that you've said, what I can actually do for you, and why don't we meet again in a week or so. Because relationships are very much reliant on multiple ongoing interactions, you've just created for yourself the opportunity for a follow-up meeting. Now the question is, what do you do after that meeting? And this is where you have to start mapping the expectations. So let me show you what that looks like. Any expectation that they've given you, which happens to be fully aligned with your job definition, with your roles and responsibilities, and with your capacity to deliver, This would be a high score on the functionality relationship KPI. Any one of those, just mark down with an X. Now, you'll find in many cases that one of the limiting factors in the relationship they have with you is that they're not fully aware of the full scope of value that you can generate for them. And so after you've taken a look at the expectations they've presented you with and found the ones that are fully aligned, add additional expectations that they didn't mention that also fall within the A-type expectations. The second thing you want to do is look at all of the expectations they made that they want of you, which on the one hand aren't really part of your formal role, but you know something? They're possible. These are what we call not aligned, but acceptable. I like to call this column the goodwill column. This is where we go the extra mile. This is where we go out on a limb. This is where we do the extra and really try to find ways of generating value. Now, you don't want to do this too much because at the end of the day, you do have a job to fill, but you do want to stay flexible enough, open enough, goodwilling enough to identify opportunities to generate value for them that would really improve the relationship. The third column is the not aligned and not acceptable. These are expectations that are made of you that, with all due respect, you simply cannot deliver in that way. But it's still too soon to say I can't. What you want to do is, among these types of expectations, you want to begin by looking at what of these expectations I can't do, but I know somebody else who can. Meaning, I know another entity in the organization, there's another interface, there's another unit I work with, there's another manager I know who this expectation happens to fall exactly within their A-type column, and maybe I can make the connection between the two. And there you go, I'm still delivering value. And another great way of looking at it is actually saying, wait a minute, is there another way? Meaning, number one is an expectation that I cannot fulfill. I simply cannot fulfill it. But what if instead of fulfilling the expectation, I actually found an alternative way of generating the end value that this expectation was meant to generate? Once you have this map in front of you, you're ready for your follow-up meeting. And now, look at the benefit of not having said yes or no in the first meeting. Look how much you were able to learn. So now you walk into that meeting, you say, thanks for meeting me again. I've taken a deep look at all the expectations you've given me, and let me respond. First of all, with regards to this expectation, this is, let's say, number 2, absolutely no problem. Number 3, 4, or whatever, these are the expectations that I'm happy to do for you. And by the way, there are a few others that you didn't mention that I can also do, and you start talking about them. Now, with regards to this expectation, I want to be very honest with you. I can do it, but I can't do it as frequently, I can't do it as intensively as I can the other ones that I've just said yes to. However, please feel free to ask me when the time is right for you, and I promise to do my best, because this is something that, on occasion, I can definitely do. Now, there was an expectation you asked of me, which I went and did my homework and found that I really don't have the ability, the resources, even the official mandate to help you with. But I remembered that I know somebody from the other department, and I called them and I asked them if this is something they could do. Don't worry, I didn't mention your name. I wanted to get your permission first. But I just wanted to check, and they actually said to me that this is definitely something they're happy to do, and that I should feel free to make the introduction. So if you'd like, I'm happy to do that for you. And finally, there was something else that you asked me for, and I looked, high and low, and I spoke to my manager, and I'm afraid I couldn't do it. But I recall that you told me that the actual value you're trying to generate was this value, and I think I found a different way of doing it. Would that work for you? Now, just listen to the last few minutes of me talking. The person sitting in front of me, hearing me talk like this, what do you think is their general impression? What is their perception of me? Remember, messenger status. Are they hearing somebody who is truly, truly committed to generating value to them? Or are they listening to somebody who's too busy to say yes and just can't do anything for them because I have my own stuff? So, you see, there's an approach here which is all about truly thinking in a way that's asset oriented, really, really trying to find every possible way of generating value for your key stakeholder. And the driving motivation for you, because I know how busy you are, is that if I do in fact improve my relationship with this person, I will have more influence over them. And if I have more influence over them, my life will be easier. Now, for those of you who are sitting there and thinking, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. If I went into a meeting with somebody with this approach, they would eat me up alive. My company's a jungle. Never show weakness. All I can tell you is it's really a matter of style of delivery. It's your body language, it's your eye contact, it's your tone of voice. You're not coming in to the meeting to suck up to them. You're actually coming in to share with them a real analysis that you did of their needs on the one hand and of your capabilities on the other, and you're showing them that you are very committed to your own role, but you are equally committed to generating value for them. And I think if you do it correctly, most people, most of the time, will respond in a very positive way. So let's continue. Now, you finish the meeting with them, and you know what they want of you. Now it's time to go back to the relationship targets that you were setting, or the relationship dashboard. Here are the KPIs. Here would be everything that you wrote as the current state. Here would be everything that you wrote that you want to achieve. And now it's time for you to start asking yourself, okay, how can I get there? And obviously, you want to begin with all of the expectations that your key stakeholders shared with you, but it can be much more than that. For instance, if you discovered that you don't know much about their personal lifestyle or you don't know who they look up to, an action item might be to look them up online, or to have a meeting in their office and see what books are on their shelves, or to become closer and spend more time building a relationship with some of the people who are close to them, or even their gatekeepers, the secretary, the assistant, who manage their calendar and who meet with them every day. These people can share information with you. Now, this is not about playing games, and this is not about cynically trying to get close to somebody. This model is all about win-win. If you are truly committed to learning about the other person, to understanding their world, to taking a closer look at who they are, what are they dealing with, where are they coming from, where are they trying to get to, if you do that sincerely, they will benefit greatly from you, and you in turn will benefit greatly from them. So this is not cynical. This is about a true desire to build a real meaningful relationship with the other person. And so under the action item, you ask yourself, what can you do? Now, the reason I think this is such an important column, the what can I do question, is because most of us feel that we are limited in our capacity to affect change, especially in a big organization. And if only somebody gave us more money, or if only they invited us to meetings, or if only we were promoted, or if only they collaborated, or if only they followed the rules, things would be easier. And we tend to leave the responsibility at the other person's doorstep. And you know something? In many cases, that may be objectively true. It could be very true that if people around you conducted themselves differently and in a more appropriate way, yeah, you could probably do more for them. You could probably do more of your job better. But that's not how the world works. And this is where leadership comes in. And this is where I tell you, look, I don't care how senior or junior you are in the organization. I believe you that you feel like a small screw in a big machine. You're probably right about the fact that a lot of the difficulties you're dealing with are only symptoms to deeper problems that you did not create and that you don't necessarily have the authority to solve. But at the end of the day, when it comes to relationship management, the ball is in your court. There are a lot of things that you can do, and that's why I love this model, because it really empowers you. You're not dependent on anybody except yourself and how well you manage yourself with your key stakeholder. With that said, once you have a list of action items, it's time to look for the opportunities to actually capture positive interactions with your key stakeholder. So we start with existing opportunities. If there's a summit or a sales kickoff event or some kind of annual conference the company is conducting, or even a town hall session, maybe there are quarterly reviews that you're going to participate in where you're going to talk to them, and that's an opportunity to interact. Maybe there is a certain presentation that they're giving or that you're giving where they're going to be giving you feedback. Anyway, different type of events that already are scheduled in the organizational calendar that are going to allow you an opportunity to interact with the other person. And then you look at the list of action items that you've created and you ask yourself, which of these can I actually carry out before the event? Which of them should I carry out during the event? Which of them can I do after the event? And you literally schedule them into your calendar. I told you, relationships can and should be managed like a project, and they should have a project roadmap. So these are the existing opportunities, what we would call the low-hanging fruit, things that you don't have to do much. They've been created for you. But that's not it. There's more. Because there are also initiated opportunities. These are opportunities that you can generate, proactively create for yourself as another way of interacting with these people. Let's say you're part of a management team. Why not invite them to one of the meetings, have them speak? Why not sit to lunch with them, invite them to a lunch? If there's a holiday, send them some kind of message. If you know they came back from vacation, ask them how it was. Again, things that you can do before, during, and after. Together, this will become your relationship roadmap, and that's how you can constantly improve and proactively create a situation where the relationship you have with your key stakeholder is deeper and more meaningful and ultimately makes you a business partner to them. Now, in the interest of making the process of filling out the table that I showed you with the current state and the desired state, that can take a long time. So we have begun developing an online tool, again, titled Are You an Asset or a Burden? And that's actually the address of the website. It's www.assetorburden.com. On this website, you can actually answer a set of questions while in your head thinking about a certain colleague of yours. And at the end, we will not only tell you if you rank as a provider, a trusted advisor, a business partner, or an opinion leader, but we will also show you this spider graph, which will show you which of the KPIs you're strong on, like this one, and which of the KPIs are the weakest link. And once you understand that, you can be much more effective in improving the relationship you have with that key stakeholder. So I hope that this webinar was informative for you and effective. I hope that you're walking away from this webinar with the understanding not only that relationships can be managed like projects, but that it's really in your best interests to find time in your weekly busy schedule to invest more in a select number of people that you've identified as being important in enabling you to do your job not only in a more effective way, but even in a way that's easier for you so that life isn't quite so difficult. If you want any more information or if you'd want a copy of this presentation, you can email me at arielh@vayomar.com or call our offices in Israel or even just visit our website. Best of luck.